Hi everyone and welcome to Book Boop. My name is Rachel and welcome to another one of my recent reads where I'm going to talk about some books that I read, I'm going to say relatively recently, because I feel like I've gotten behind on doing recent reads yet again, because I'm going to talk about 5 books today and it feels like I've read them a really long time ago, which means I may struggle to remember what they were even about. Thankfully, I've got my notebook here that I write down notes in, and at least I write down some notes after I finish each book just to kind of help me remember what I felt about it. So I will be referencing to those notes, so if I look away from the screen, that is why. But let's go ahead and jump into the past 5 books that I read relatively recently. First of all is one that I have very mixed feelings about, and it's called The God Game by Tobey. This is an adult thriller novel. It focuses on YA protagonists, though. These are all people that are in high school, and this is all about this game called The God Game that is mainly located on the dark web. And it's a game where someone has created, they've taken all different texts of different types of gods throughout different cultures and mashed it all together and created a program out of it that is supposed to be a god simulator, basically. And in this game, if you choose to accept it, it is a augmented reality game. So if you hold up your phone, you know how you can, I think it's like the Pokemon game you can play, like Pokemon Go. If you hold up your phone, you see a Pokemon sitting on your table. It's not really there, but it's like augmented reality, right? And that's what this is supposed to be. It's like an augmented reality game. So they like to get together, these group of kids, they get together and have kind of like a tech club kind of, and they like to meet in the computer room, and sometimes they'll break into the school at night and meet there late at night, and they first start the God game, and like through their phones, the entire school transforms before them into like this really kind of dark, creepy place, kind of like almost like the Upside Down from Stranger Things. Anyways, it's a really, really cool concept. Of course, this gets very dark very quick because the whole thing with the God game is once you are in it, you're in it for life, and the only way to get out of the God game is to die, basically. So that's kind of like the main premise of the game. It sounds really cool. It kind of mixes up a thriller aspect with like almost like a Ready Player One feel in a way, and getting sucked into a game. But this honestly was a bit of a miss for me. I'm gonna look at my notes here to make sure that I don't forget anything. But first of all, it is a fascinating and terrifying concept. My struggle with this is that the characters are all terrible people. They're all horrible people. Now, granted, this God game manipulates them to do terrible things. It's basically like a one-up system. Like you can get points from the God game, and if you get points, then you are given certain things or good things happen to you. And if you do something that's bad within the God's game's eyes, then something bad happens in your life in real life. And so they're all doing these things to get points in the God game, but it seems like everything they're having to do ends up doing something really horrible to somebody else. So it's just a really dark thing, and all these kids, even when some of them they don't realize or they don't really necessarily want to hurt other people, they still are. And it gets to a point where I feel like they don't care because they just kind of care about themselves. Even within their friendship group, it gets to the point where they're all kind of like tearing at each other's throats. And it's just, they're all awful people, and you just don't have anybody that you root for. You don't really end up caring about the characters because they're just all awful. I have to say that the high school setting and the tropes within that setting felt a bit stale. I can't even remember what tropes I was thinking of at the time, but it just felt a little like high school tropey, kind of like who's the jock in the school, and the nerd group wanting to one-up the jock group, and like, I don't know, it kind of had that stale high school tropey kind of thing going on of like the people groups within high schools. The angle of people doing terrible things to get ahead just isn't for me. I don't like it when I read a book and there's just nobody to root for, and you just don't like the characters. And it got to the point, the concept was really cool, but then I got frustrated with the concept because every character was so terrible and everybody was doing terrible things to each other that I started to get frustrated with the idea of this game, because it was more like, how can we be manipulative? How can we do terrible things? And I felt like that ended up being more the thriller aspect of it. That seemed to be what upped the thrill, was like, what sort of terrible thing can these kids get away with? So I wasn't a huge fan of this. It had such a cool concept. I was hoping it was going to be amazing. I gave it 3 out of 5, so not a terrible rating. I didn't hate it, but it just really wasn't my favorite. I'm probably not going to end up keeping this one on my shelves. I just didn't really like it that much, and I don't really honestly recommend it. If it sounds cool to you, go for it. You may love it. If you don't have an issue with just terrible characters, then you may really like this one. But that's where I was on that. Okay, the rest of the books that I read, the next 4, I do not have physically. I borrowed them from the library originally, but I will hold up a picture for you just to kind of help you remember what book I'm talking about and so you can see the cover. So the next one was way out of my wheelhouse, and that is Beach Read by Emily Henry. And this is an adult contemporary, way out of my wheelhouse. I don't read contemporaries. I especially don't read adult contemporaries. This is a romance contemporary, which definitely is out of my comfort zone. If you haven't heard of this one before, it's a really popular adult contemporary book that came out, I think either last year or in 2019. In this story, we are following 2 writers. One of them writes novels for, I wouldn't say romance. She writes literary fiction, but that's like in the romance spectrum. And then there's a guy that writes literary fiction and kind of like heavy hitting books. And these 2 characters, way back in the day, they went to college together. They were kind of rivals at this college, and now they kind of view themselves as rivals now that they are both published authors. Okay, now we've got that premise, right? Now, the girl's father recently passed away. When he passed away, some things about her father came to light that were unexpected. One of which is that she is being left a house, a beach house, and so she ends up going to this beach house to try to write a book that she's struggling to write. She's having some serious writer's block. While she's there, she ends up running into this guy who is her, as she views, her arch nemesis, this literary fiction guy. She feels like he thinks that the stuff that she writes is silly and stupid and vice versa, and she's thinking he's all pretentious because of the stuff he writes. They end up making a deal and flipping genres. So he's going to try to write more of a romance contemporary, and she's going to try to write literary fiction, and just to get out of their own heads and see if they can try to write books because they're both having writer's block. Of course, it's a contemporary romance, so they fall in love. That's not a surprise. That's not a spoiler. You know it from the beginning. So that's the main premise of this book. It sounded really cute. It sounded like a romance that's for book lovers, which sounds perfect for me because I love to read books about books, and I felt like that this one probably had that feel. All right, let's see what I said. Super cute contemporary romance. As assumed, it's a perfectly fluffy summer read, so perfect for the summer. I saved this to read during the summer, and I ended up reading it in July. It's not necessarily realistic. Not much of a surprise, but I did enjoy the witty dialogue. There's a lot of witty dialogue. I've noticed that whenever I've read anything more contemporary, especially if it's leading toward romance, there's a lot of like witty dialogue thrown in there, which I really actually like. Like The Bookish Life of Nina Hill, that book, that was another romance adult contemporary that I did actually enjoy. It was like another book about books kind of thing, or bookish people, and it was a lot of witty dialogue, and I really enjoyed it. I will say that it felt a bit long, but it was still good. I do struggle with contemporaries in general because a lot of times, at least for me personally, contemporaries have a tendency to be on the long side, at least from the contemporaries I've read, and this was no exception for me. Now, I don't feel like there's anything that needed to be left out. It didn't feel like it was stretched out and there was pointless information. It just felt long. I don't like reading longer contemporaries. I want them to be really short, really sweet. So this was a little bit long to me. Overall, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I had to remember what I gave it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, so I did enjoy it. It's not overly memorable. It's not overly memorable for me. It's not something I'm going to read again. It makes me more open to reading contemporary. It's not my genre choice, but it makes me more open to reading it because I did enjoy it, and it was fun, and it was fluffy, and just to read something like this every once in a while is good. So if this sounds interesting to you, I would try it out because it's a very popular one, and a lot of people really, really like it. All right. We've got 3 more to let go. Let's do this. I feel like I need to pick up the pace. I feel like I'm taking too long to talk about these. So, all right. The next one is an adult thriller. This one also is very popular and was recommended to a friend, recommended to me from a friend, my sweet friend Kristen, and that is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. Again, this is an adult thriller. This takes place on a remote island in Ireland, and there is a very exclusive guest list, and people really want to be on this guest list. It's a very important wedding. But here's the thing. There is a murder that happens at the wedding, and there's 2 things that are a mystery, which I thought was really cool. Number 1, who done it? Number 2, who was murdered. That was a really interesting thing for me. Usually at the beginning of a murder mystery thriller type thing, you know who's murdered at the beginning of the book. And the whole book you're wondering who done it, right? This one's really neat because at the beginning book we know someone's murdered, but we don't know who it is. And then it steps back in time and going on these different perspectives for these different people that attended the wedding. And it was really interesting to be like, okay, one of these guests or one of these people involved is the person that was murdered, and one of these people is also the person that murdered them. And so it was so fascinating to be like, who died? Not only who did it, but who died. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. I don't know how many other books are written like that. This was the first one I personally had read that had that premise, and I thought that was really cool because I was fascinated just to know who was murdered because I didn't even know. All right, so this one, classic murder mystery feel. Everyone in this story is terrible. This reminded me of the God Game in a way, although this one didn't bother me as much. But I do know some people that have DNF'd this book or did not finish this book because they just couldn't stand the characters. And to be honest, characters are all terrible. They're all terrible people. They've all screwed up and done terrible things. Some of them are a little bit more rootable than others that you can kind of root for, but most of them are really awful people and just have done terrible things. And I can see why the characters needed to be that way, because at the same time, you kind of want to be able to look at everybody and think they all are probably capable of murder. You know what I mean? Like they're all probably capable of doing something terrible because they're terrible people. So it kind of made you more suspicious of everybody in that way. So I guess I could see why you would want everyone to be terrible. I loved that the victim and the murderer was a mystery. Thought that was really cool. Really short chapters and fast paced. I love it when books have short chapters, especially thrillers, because you want thrillers to be fast paced anyways, but when it's got short chapters, oh, you just want to keep going. So I love the fact that the chapters were so short. It was lots of murdery fun. I don't know why I wrote that, but apparently I did. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. It was a good time. I didn't love it, because I didn't like the characters, but also you're not supposed to, because you just want to suspect everybody. So this was a really cool, fun, kind of like rainy island, Ireland thing. So if that sounds interesting, go for it. It was a cool one. All right. The next book is one that I didn't really have on my radar. I can't talk today if you can't tell. And it's a really popular book, well-awarded book. It wasn't one that I really was terribly interested to begin with, but my friend really recommended it to me and said, hey, you've got to read this. I really love this book. And that is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This is a post-apocalyptic or a post-pandemic story. So, pretty terrifying to read nowadays because we're within a pandemic, so it's a little bit terrifying to read about a book with a pandemic that hits on a huge scale. So, at least when you read the description of this book, we are following a group of people that is considered like a traveling orchestra. It's traveling musicians, traveling actors. They travel throughout, I think it's North America is where they are, if I'm remembering correctly. They're traveling throughout this post-apocalyptic, post-pandemic North America, traveling from kind of like small town to small town village, performing, and we're following those people. So that's kind of what the description is for this book. This was a lot more than that, though. Let me look at my notes here. Absolutely terrifying and honestly realistic concept of a pandemic, especially now that we've seen what kind of things happen during a pandemic in our time. It was really scary and felt pretty accurate, to be honest. There were a lot of perspectives and timelines. We were jumping back and forth in time a lot. Pre-pandemic, when it's hit, when it's happening, afterwards, like we jump all over the timeline. This was not exactly what I expected in that I'm fine with books that jump around in the timeline. That's fine with me. However, I did feel like most of the chapters and most of the plot points we were hitting didn't feel like much of a plot. It felt like a series of vignettes. We were following pretty similar characters throughout, but I felt like some of the plot lines or storylines were these like encapsulated vignettes. Not that they weren't interesting, but I didn't feel like they were really contributing that much to an overall story. I didn't feel like there's much of a plot in this book. It's more like vignettes of like, this is kind of what happened with this person right before the pandemic hit. This is what happened with this person when the pandemic hit. This is what's happening with this person after the pandemic in this post-apocalyptic world. Like, it's kind of like these series of vignettes, and we're following these characters, but they're jumping back and forth in time depending if it's like right before, during, or after the pandemic. And I don't know, because of that, sometimes they just didn't feel important or didn't feel connected. It felt too much like a bunch of short stories mashed together that kind of sort of connected in a way. It felt slow and meandering because of that. It just didn't feel like it had this really driving plot that made me want to read more. It was a fascinating concept and terrifying concept of this post-pandemic world, but at the same time, it just didn't have a driving plot that I was interested in finding out more about, to be honest. It was mainly just a series of vignettes and a series of, this is what people could go through. This is what this person was thinking about during this. And it did have beautiful prose, gorgeous writing. It really did. It's well written. It just wasn't quite for me. I did give it 4 out of 5 stars, probably because of how well it was written. I didn't overly enjoy the reading experience, but it is a very well written, beautifully written book. So I do recommend it. It's 4 out of 5 stars. Really good. I struggle to remember a lot of the plot points at this point because there weren't that many. It was just a lot of vignettes. But there's some parts that were really fascinating. So I'm going to stop talking about this one, but that was Station 11 for me. All right, we've got one more to talk about. This one is one I've wanted to read for the longest time. And it is what is the name of the type of book? The really, really short book. What's it called? It's a really short book, okay? Novella, yes. I couldn't think of the word. I was like, I'm gonna feel dumb if I can't remember the word novella. It's a novella by Josh Malerman called A House at the Bottom of a Lake. This one, what sounded so fascinating to me, because it found like this just short novella, this short, creepy story about this young couple that goes on a first date, decides to go canoeing on a lake, and they find kind of this remote portion of the lake, and when they get there, they find out that there is a house at the bottom of the lake, and it just goes from there. And they end up going down into the house and exploring it. There's some spooky things that happen there. So it's just this really spooky, atmospheric read. It's very fast-paced with short chapters. Obviously it needs to be because it's a novella. It's pretty darn short. It's only 118 pages, so it's gonna fly by. I wasn't particularly interested in the characters, but the house setting and feel was nice and creepy. I didn't really like the characters that much, to be honest. I wasn't invested with them. I wasn't really overly invested with their relationship, but I was really interested in the house. I was interested in the mystery of this house. Why was it at the bottom of the lake? Why did certain things work the way they do inside this house? Like, it was a lot of creepy atmosphere in it and a lot of great visuals in this book. This would be really cool to see as a movie, honestly. I would love to see this as a movie. I think it would make a really cool, atmospheric, honestly kind of terrifying movie, to be honest. Great story for spooky season and to read in one sitting. I ended up reading it within a 2-day period. But I could have easily read this in one sitting, to be honest. It's fast-paced, fun, and spooky. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars as well. So those are all the books I'm going to talk about today. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Let me know about a book that you read recently, maybe a book that you really, really loved, or a book you really, really hated, kind of like on each side of the spectrum. Just let me know down below so we can have a little bookish discussion. I'd love to chat with you about it. On this side of the video over here is my logo. If you click on that, you can subscribe to my channel, follow me on my book journey. On this side of the video over here is a suggestion for another video if you would like to watch another one of my videos right now. But thank you so much for watching. You rock, and don't forget to keep reading. Bye!